Welcome to Prison Professors and White Collar Advice. Today I'm here with my good friend and my partner, Justin Paperny. Justin, why don't you say hello to our audience? It's the first time I think I'm going to be introducing you to Prison Professors, but I'd really like to tell a little bit about the story. So why don't you tell them a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what brought you into the prison system?
Well, thank you so much. I hope everyone finds value in what I have to say today. Who am I? I'm Justin Paperny, grew up in Encino, just outside of Los Angeles. I'm now 45 years old, married with 2 young kids, and I'm here today in part because of my own experience through the criminal justice system. After I graduated USC in 1997, I was a stockbroker. Many years into my career, I began making some terrible decisions on behalf of a client. Those bad decisions led to an investigation, a 3.5-year investigation, which culminated in pleading guilty to securities fraud, an 18-month federal prison sentence. And upon my surrender, I had the privilege to meet Michael Santos. And ever since 2008, when we met, we've been working together, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to provide some value today.
Well, Justin, thanks so much for that introduction. Today, what we're going to be talking about, just so that you know, Justin, we're taking this episode and we're going to pipe this into prisons and jails across America. I also think it would be valuable to share with your audience at White Collar Advice, and we will get into that so that people can learn a little bit about the dynamics, about what does it take to truly emerge from a prison experience, a criminal charge, and come back strong with your dignity intact, with opportunities to build a new life, to recalibrate. And you really are the perfect example of that because of the way that you came out. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about when you came out, what was going on in the country at that time?
So I was released from prison in August of 2009, and there was a terrible recession taking place. I think they said they had the worst economy since the Great Depression. I was released into a very difficult job market. I was a convicted felon. My reputation, of course, had been ruined on the internet due to all of the Department of Justice press releases. I had lost my ability to sell real estate or stock. So naturally, I was somewhat concerned and apprehensive about my release. And in retrospect, when I surrendered to prison, all I thought about initially was my release. And then I realized upon my surrender how many of my fellow prisoners were somewhat scared to go home because they weren't ready. And I thought if I didn't prepare, that could be me. So when I was released from prison, I was somewhat nervous.
Well, before you get back to where you're released, stay right there, because I think a lot of our audience is in that stage. And so when you're in that stage, you had previously been a licensed financial professional, and you no longer were going to have that license. And you were in that stage, like many of the people watching this video are. What's going to happen? Did you really have the foresight at that point in time to be thinking about what's going to happen on the other end of the journey? Or were you just saying, how do I get my commissary? What are you thinking about?
Initially, it was, I was concerned about what would happen to me in prison based on everything that is so sensationalized on prison. Once I realized where I was serving time, that might not be the case. I then began to use my time in prison, exercising all day, not really preparing for the other side. And frankly, it wasn't until I had a conversation with you where you asked me, what do you do when you go home? And I said, well, I'm just going to do what I did before I came in. I'm going to continue to sell real estate. So there isn't a need for me to do anything else other than really exercise here. And you said, well, can you sell real estate with this conviction? I said, of course. My conviction is when I was a stockbroker. I've been selling real estate for 2 years. And through these conversations, you helped me understand, well, what if you can't sell real estate? What are other options? And my response was, I don't have any other options. I'm in prison. There isn't anything I can really do from here. I'll figure it out when I come home. And the benefit to everyone watching this video is I was able to work alongside you every day in prison and begin to get on track. They now have that same opportunity, which was transformative. But to your question, I was somewhat delusional about what life would look like for me on the other side.
So I don't think that you're alone. I think that people that are in jail right now, people that are in prison right now, people that are looking for you online as the director of White Collar Advice, they're in that stage of my life is kind of falling apart. How do I get it on track? And very few people know where to get that kind of information, which is the real value that you provide. And we've been able to build a relatively robust consulting business around that. Why don't you tell me, what does it take to build a consulting practice when you're starting out as a felon, as somebody who is sitting in prison? If this is something that you want to do, I'd like them to hear from you as somebody who actually earns a living doing this. What does it take to be a prison consultant?
For me, and what I would suggest for anyone looking to build any business, whether in the prison consulting industry or elsewhere, I did a very good job with your help of understanding how people would perceive me, people with whom I would want to work, trying to put myself in their shoes. So I understood a probation officer may be very cynical about my wanting to work with felons, that perhaps a potential client or a defendant would be cynical about retaining white-collar advice because they may think, my God, you were just in federal prison for fraud. Is it going to continue? So I initially put myself in the shoes of the other person and worked to create a record that could demonstrate why I would be worthy of their support, to their investment. And that started with documenting the journey. And rather than just talking about what I hope to do, I began to create a track record of why I think was worthy, a track record that shows I have the skill set to help them. That was done with your help, of course, in prison through a blog and then a manuscript. So on the other side of prison, rather than someone saying, well, what did you do all day in prison? Why can you help me? Why should I give you money? Who are you? Rather than tell them, I was able to show them, and that was transformative for me. And all came back to content we were creating on the inside.
So that means that there are some skills that you had as you'd mentioned that you had graduated from the University of Southern California. You had a degree, you had experience working in the professional capacity. A lot of people in prison don't have, first of all, the guidance that you may have received, but in addition to that, they may lack some of those basic skills. And those basic skills include learning how to put words into sentences and sentences into paragraphs. And so regardless of where you are, that is one strategy that somebody could be using. And again, that's not a skill that is specific to prison consulting, what you do. I think it's specific to any business that somebody goes through. Is you've got to learn how to communicate better, and anybody can do that. Another skill that's extremely valuable to anybody going into this system is to develop very strong critical thinking skills, to learn how to ask the types of Socratic questions that will help you really move towards the best possible outcome. Why don't you give us an example of some of the critical thinking skills that you used along the way that put you in a position to get the best possible outcome in going through your prison sentence?
Well, I'm fortunate to praise you, but in working alongside you, you talk about these Socratic questions. I remember one day walking into the visiting or quiet room, and you were working. I said, what are you doing? And you said, well, I'm writing letters. I said, to whom? And you said, to people. I'd like to grow my network. And I said, well, why would you do that? What if they don't respond? And you said, what if somebody does? So that was transformative for me because I was initially reluctant to do that. I was embarrassed to even reach out to people. So just by starting, you began to ask me, what's the next right thing that you can do? Because I didn't want to write online. I didn't want to share my story. And you said, you don't have to do that today. What's the next right thing to do? So again, as I said earlier, beginning to once I knew there could be a market, and once I began to speak with other people in prison who had my same experience, they were afraid to go to prison, didn't know how to work with their lawyer, they were concerned about how they would sustain themselves on the other side. You encouraged me to go interview them, to go learn those lessons and draw from their experiences and begin to share them with others, these real life case studies. So through that process of just starting and asking better questions, I then began to learn and share what I was learning. And that's partly why the prison term was so productive for me, because I didn't look at it as time lost, but the time was truly benefiting me every single day, preparing to come home. And I think that's what made my transition earlier. And I recognized pretty early prison, even with a short sentence, would be harder on my family when they would visit me. So by being able to share that work with my family and letting them know how I was growing through confinement, I think it inspired them and showed that I could take a very difficult situation and make something out of it. So it really started by sitting alongside you and then beginning to use those tools and put them into action every day. Without action, it's just a lot of talk, as you used to say, every single day.
So it's really important. What we just learned from Justin is really, it's important to take action. It's important to be thinking about what is the best possible outcome, not the best outcome. I mean, ideally, somebody wants to get, a call that the president of the United States has just commuted your sentence and you're walking home. But that's probably not a realistic outcome, and it's certainly not something that you control. What I think I heard from Justin, and what I'd like you to be thinking about, there are action steps that you can begin taking right now to improve your communication skills, develop your vocabulary, learn to communicate in a persuasive way so that you can have influence over other people. And now, instead of seeing you as this person who's always whining or complaining about, my God, what happened to me, you're starting to think about, how can I bring value to others? And I think we've heard that from Justin a couple of times today. How do I bring value? I want to bring value. And the more you think about that, the more you develop critical thinking skills and the more you realize, what more can I do? Now, in addition to the good questions that you made, Justin, good decisions you made, why don't you tell us about some of the bad decisions, if there are any, or something that you wish you would have done differently?
In prison or?
Wherever you'd like to tell us. And frankly, I'll probably ask you both sides.
So I will acknowledge in my 20s as a stockbroker, I was somewhat easily influenced, to a degree, kind of a pleaser, wanted to go with the flow. I didn't really like confrontation. So upon my surrender, that tendency, I think, still existed. So upon my surrender, when guys would welcome me or want to help me and they'd ask to walk the track with me, I kind of felt obligated to say, okay. And upon my surrender, I think it was a bad decision. Some of the friendships I formed, their values were different from mine. And I'm walking around the track for 5 hours hearing about someone's story. And while I'm sympathetic to the story, being hearing how the government screwed them and this and that, it did not get me closer to my goal. So a mistake I made upon my surrender was continuing to be influenced by other prisoners, not using my time productively. And it really required a lot of introspection and thought about how I'm using not just every month or every week, but every hour. And once I began to assess it from that manner, I was more productive. I began spending more time either with you or alone, and I really began to get on track for my inevitable release. So that biggest problem, to your question, I think forming some of the wrong friendships and feeling a sense or feeling beholden or obligated to spend time with people and learning to say no is crucial for me in federal prison and creating my own routine.
How about, since you've been released from prison, if you could go back to that period of time when you first walked out, and now I know that you've been out of prison for about 10 years or a little longer than 10 years, and you've got a very successful consulting practice. Why don't you tell us, if you look back, what would you have done differently the day you got out, so that we kind of wisen people up on strategies that they should be pursuing in the beginning?
I think two things. One, marketing is incredible. You could have the greatest story, but if you're unable to market it, if you don't have the skill set to market it, it really doesn't matter. So for many years, I didn't create a YouTube video. I had great content, but again, if no one came across it, it didn't matter. So I should have spent more time understanding basic marketing skills, whether it's Facebook, Google, YouTube, writing copy. That was a mistake. And two, I think when I came home, I always felt like if things didn't work out, at least for the first few years, there was a plan B. And sometimes when you think there's a plan B, it may not, it can give you a sense of comfort if things aren't working out, because it's like, oh, I can go do plan B. Once I realized several years into my career that I'm going to have to become a better marketer, a better communicator, and that two, there is no plan B. I now have a family. I am a convicted felon. There is nothing else that I could do. I then realized I have to make this work. And I began to turn away some other interests. I began to say no to projects that wouldn't further advance my career. So no plan B. I was all in. And really marketing I used to write Michael in federal prison when he was in, I was out, and I would tell him about what I was doing. And in retrospect, I now tell him I should have been more focused on marketing and getting the message out to people who I know could find value in our work. That's been a big transition for us, along with the messaging of our companies.
So let's talk a little bit about that Plan B statement, okay? Justin had a different skill set than a lot of people in prison because he was already a university graduate. He was already a professional. He was already well accustomed to helping clients understand how to grow. But many people in prison are not at that level today. That doesn't mean they can't grow to that level in the weeks, months, and years to come. And the way that somebody might do that is by building a vocabulary, by developing critical thinking skills, by going through those same exercises that we just heard Justin talking about, interviewing other people, understand the pain points that they have gone through, become a master, become the best in the world at a very specific subject. And those skills translate into any career, regardless of what you are pursuing. The reality is, marketing is not only applicable to business that he is in right now, it is applicable to the business of your life. You want to be able to be the CEO of your own life. And that means you've got to tell a story. You've got to tell a story that elicits empathy, that elicits somebody to be inspired by you instead of somebody saying, what a loser. And so my question for you today is to say, if I were to step in front of an audience of somebody else, how are they going to see me? Are they going to see me as Justin's clients see him, as a consummate professional, somebody that can help them from spiraling out of control, somebody that can help them restore confidence and get back on the horse and come out and be successful? Or are they going to see him as somebody who's going to talk about nonsense? So the more you develop skills in communication, the more you develop skills in learning how to tell a story, the more effective you are going to be in selling yourself, whether it is to get your first entry-level job in as a short order cook or to advance to a much higher level. All of these skills that you're hearing Justin talk about are universally applicable. So Justin, why don't you now tell us a little bit more about the business that you're running right now?
Before I do that, can I touch on a couple of quick points? A practical takeaway for everyone is, when I was in prison, I began to read a lot. And I would say to Michael, I read this book today. And you'd say, what did you learn from it? I'd say, I don't know, it's a good question. How will this book help when you come home? I'm like, I don't really know. And he's like, well, it's good you're reading, but what are the takeaways? How is it going to help you? So a conversation like that, an exercise Michael suggested was, if you read a book, write down how it helps you and how it's going to help you for your release. That was one. And two, I had joked with Michael in prison that I got dumb in my 20s. I read 2 books, and I think they were both golf books. So from there, I wanted to improve my vocabulary. And initially I said, what am I going to stand in line to the chow hall holding index cards? He said, sure, if you want to prepare to come home and be a better communicator, great. So then I was reading books, documenting how I was learning from them, and then growing my vocabulary by hundreds and hundreds of words, enabling me to become a better communicator. So just 2 conversations and then the quick implementation of them made every day fun, because how many words could I learn by the end of the day? And rather than reading 5 books a month, maybe I'd only read 1 because I'd have to read it 3 times to fully get it. So those were key to my communication. Can you come back to the question you asked? I wanted to get that point in because it takes me back to us being in prison and how it was so transformative for me.
I don't remember the question right now, but I have no shortage of questions. So not a problem. I asked you to tell us, now it comes back to me, I asked you to tell our audience about the business that you're doing today and how it is providing for your family.
So in federal prison, with your help, we began to create this blog and then a manuscript, and people were finding a lot of value in that work. I began to get a lot of letters every week at mail call, and I said to Michael, this is really helping. And together we decided, well, there's a market here to help people who are afraid to work with their lawyer, afraid to speak openly with counsel, afraid to acknowledge in open court they made bad decisions. And through this process that began in prison, we're now 12 years into preparing all defendants for each phase of the journey. If the journey is preparing for sentencing, well, what does that mean? It means beginning to create content through your own words that could demonstrate what you've learned, why you're worthy of leniency, of holding that lawyer accountable, of being incredibly productive. I received a call from a defendant last week who received a shorter sentence in part because he was working all the way through his sentencing and frankly working in a job that was probably beneath his skill set, but it showed the judge that he was willing to work as a law-abiding citizen. So it's putting these decisions into place every single month. Going back to when I came home from prison, the work was really just telling people what life in prison was like. It was kind of boilerplate stuff, to be very honest, 9, 10, 11, and 12. But over the years, it's really morphed into preparing for sentencing in a way that conveys to the judge that you're authentic, remorseful if you've pled guilty, and not just outsourcing all of the work to lawyers. Of course, preparing people for prison, but as we mentioned, it's just not how to shop in the commissary. It's not stuff that you can get for free on our YouTube channel. It's how will this prison experience impact the rest of your life? How are you looking 10 years out and beginning to work your way back? And with that, how do you use your time in prison every day productively to create that new record, to avoid problems? You can't do anything great in prison if you're engaging in the hustle, getting disciplinary infractions, and forming the wrong friendships. And then, of course, if you're home from prison, it's, well, what do you hope to do professionally? What do you hope to do to sustain your family? You mentioned something a moment ago about a short order cook. It's easy to look at the success we've had 12 years later and think, well, he didn't have to do that. I recall a conversation in prison about a prisoner mocking a prisoner who was going to work at McDonald's when he came home. And the prisoner said, any law-abiding work is good for me. And when I came home, before this business grew, I picked up phones for many months. Any job was a great job. It was law-abiding. All work is honorable. So I looked at everything as a stage. And now 12 years later, I think we're a very valuable resource for any defendant looking to not just get the shortest sentence, but ensure the sentence doesn't amount, in many cases, to a life sentence. If you get 18 months, 2 years, or 5 years, don't let it be any longer. And that can only be the case if you're making good principled decisions on a daily basis.
So the reality is that you may be in a prison cell right now. You may be in an institution. You may be being told that you've got nothing coming, and if you can't do the crime, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. You may be getting a lot of those negative messages. But with Prison Professors, what we strive to do is show you that you can make decisions today that will put you on a pathway for success that is beyond your wildest expectations. And you've seen that if you're in an institution that has access to our programming, you will see a lot of these examples of people just like Justin who went through that environment but have come home to launch successful businesses. In fact, I did 26 years in prison, but since coming home, I've met more people out here that are in a bigger prison than I was ever in, and it's all because of the way they think. If you can learn to overcome the struggle and the difficulty that you're going through right now, you have developed an invaluable skill that you can sell to businesses that want to motivate and inspire salespeople, that you can sell to organizations that want to avoid government investigations, or you can be a competitor to Justin at White Collar Advice. There is a big problem with mass incarceration. Anybody can become a prison consultant. The question is, what level of value are you going to bring? Are you going to be the best in the world at what you do? Or are you going to be the guy who talks about it or steals content? The reality is you can start creating this pathway right now if you put in the work that Justin just described that he did while he was incarcerated. Justin, why don't you tell us, as we're coming to the end of this episode, tell us a little bit about the challenges that some of your clients are facing right now. What are those pain points that they're going through?
Well, in many cases, the reputational fallout is devastating. The Department of Justice loves to publish these releases online that really show a defendant in their worst light. And it's embarrassing and humiliating. And it requires some real work to overcome. At White Collar Advice, we don't encourage clients or any defendant to suppress it or pretend that it didn't happen, but work to create a new record on top of it. I harken back to a conversation from prison where you said, Justin, there's always going to be people that judge you for what you did. Why don't you work to create a new record? And in time, people can put them side by side and compare. Well, we encourage our clients to do that. Can't change what happened. Can't change the DOJ release. Let's not pretend it didn't happen. Let's work to create a new record. And if you can do that, you then become productive on a daily basis because you actually have to create this record if you're going to improve your reputation. That's one. Work, of course. If you're a doctor, doctor or a lawyer and you get fired, you have not just reputational issues, you may lose your job. So starting over in some cases requires a sense of humility. That's a frequent conversation I have with defendants or clients. Are you willing to start at the bottom? As I was picking up phones for 3 months, some defendants say, well, I have an MBA from a great school. I have a college degree. I was a lawyer. I don't want to do that. I say, I understand. But as you taught me, Michael, we have to act as the world is, not as we'd like it to be. You're starting over and you're rebuilding. So reputation, licensing, devastation to family. Of course, the fallout can be significant to family. And we encourage defendants, as the leader, the tone that you set will impact their health and well-being on a daily basis. So those are just 3 quick issues to cover.
So super grateful to have been able to introduce you to my partner, Justin Paperny. He runs White Collar Advice, a firm that specializes in helping people before sentencing or prepare before they go in. It is a sister company to Prison Professors, where we produce content at scale to try and influence the better outcomes for hundreds of thousands of people. But we want you to be thinking about what is the best possible outcome for you. And every day we will be providing new content to teach and inspire more people. I am Michael with Prison Professors, thanking my partner Justin Paperny and thanking you for being a part of the program. Make sure that you have your family members visit Prison Professors and subscribe to the program. And if you want the types of resources, books, and courses that may not be available in your institution, have them visit prisonprofessors.com and they can get all of these courses for you so that you can help start sowing seeds for the success that you are destined to become. Thank you so much for being a part of the program.